The Seventh Man by Haruki Murakami. Protagonist. The seventh man, an old man, has accepted his childhood friend's death that he once felt responsible for. Antagonist. The Wave. A wave caused by a typhoon that killed the seventh man's childhood friend, Kay. Other characters. Kay, the seventh man's childhood best friend, whose death he feels responsible for. The setting. A small Asian town during the 1920s and forward. Exposition. Introduction to the seventh man as he tells about his hometown.
I will tell you a story from my youth, a story that controlled my life up until a few years ago. I lived in a small coastal town with my family just down the street from my best friend Kay. Typhoons were common in my town, and that is where our story begins.
Rising action. A typhoon threatens the seventh man's hometown in his story.
During one particular storm, I was outside stretching my legs on the beach with Kay. We had agreed that out the first sign of wind we would head back inside. We had started to wade out into the water when I heard a rumbling. I had heard this sound many times before and immediately recognized it as the sound of a wave. I started to feel the rumbling beneath my feet and realized that the wave was going to be huge.
Climax. Kay is killed at the beach by a wave while playing with the seventh man in his story.
I started running as fast as I could all away from the water, but then realized that Kay had not moved. It seemed as if time had frozen still. I had two choices. I could go back to grab Kay, or I could run. I guess my flight instinct kicked in before my fight did, and I ran. I turned around just in time to see Kay, a massive wave looming over Kay. Before I could yell or scream, do anything at all, the wave seemed to swallow Kay whole in one giant gulp.
Falling action. Seventh man is hardened by Kay's death and is taken over by grief. In his story, guilt takes over.
I didn't know what else to do except run. I ran as fast as I could and hid behind a flood wall. It seemed as if only a second had passed until another monstrous wave dove up behind the flood wall. I peeked out from my hiding spot to see the wave looming in the air, as if frozen in time. And frozen in the center of the wave was Kay, with a haunting grin upon his face that seemed to radiate resentment and revenge, and that is when I started to cry. It's past, but I could never forget the look I saw in his face. The day I let him die, I lived my whole life haunted by it. At last, some terrifying smile on that fateful day. I never had a family or even a girlfriend because I was so consumed by my past. Till one day, I came across some of his old paintings, and I could see in them was a young boy, gentle smiling, with no anger or resentment towards me. Who was that?
Resolution. Seventh man comes to terms with Kay's death and lets go of his grief and guilt later in life.
I realized that smile Kay had given me on his last day of life was not one of hatred, but rather one of understanding and unending friendship. After I'd realized the truth surrounding Kay's death, I went back to the spot where he was and let the ocean embrace me. As the water splashed up against my legs, it seemed to wipe away all the guilt and grief I had felt all these years. I hope you can all learn from this and are able to live your lives free of the hauntings of your past.
Credits. Conflict. Man versus self. Seventh man blames himself for Kay's death and is consumed by guilt. Man versus nature. Wave kills Kay. Character motivation. The seventh man's guilt and grief causes him to re-examine Kay's death and if it was truly his fault. Character development. Kay's death causes the seventh man to become hard to the world. Later, the seventh man comes to terms with Kay's death and lets his guilt and grief go. Quotes. 1. Not with an ordinary smile. It was a big, wide-open grin that literally stretched from ear to ear. His cold, frozen eyes were locked on mine. This quote shows how the seventh man thought Kay looked at him right after his death. Quote 2. As he lay there in the tip of the wave, surely Kay had not been looking at me with hatred or resentment. This quote shows how the seventh man thought Kay had looked at him after his death, after he had let go of his guilt. This quote combined with the last shows the seventh man's development. Theme and message. You must accept your past so that you can move on to your future. The seventh man has to accept Kay's death and let go of his guilt so that he can live his life.
Production and writing was done by Abigail Farnsworth. Editing and co-directing was done by Lane Miller. Stage design and special effects are by Hunter Morrison, and the magnificent acting and the puppets you see here today were done by Blake Brannon.